Sometimes they come, out of the gate. But, great shows for very specific audiences ultimately attract an audience. The nice thing about streaming right now is and not having necessarily the ratings pressure. So you give these shows a chance to really breathe and find their audience.
Today's guest is Michael Burns. He's many things. He is co-founder of Lionsgate, one of the only successful major movie studios in the last 80 years in Hollywood, which that's most of the episode. He's also my neighbor. He lives right behind us, and my family, we actually rent our house from Michael. So he's he is our first friend in LA when we moved here about a year ago. And I've been wanting to have him on the podcast to give a breakdown of essentially the movie business 101 and how something goes from an idea in someone's head to a script to a pilot to a show like Mad Men, which is one of their shows from Lionsgate. And the number of shows and movies that have come out of Lionsgate in the 20 years since they were started is astounding. From early hits with Monsters Ball to the Oscar darling Crash to Mad Men to the Hunger Games, the list, Twilight series, a bunch of things that billions of people around the world have watched. Michael is as knowledgeable and insightful as he is humble about starting such a unique and successful movie studio like Lionsgate. So I'm really excited about our conversation that touches on much of his professional career as well as his personal. And if you dig conversations at the intersection of creation, philosophy, technology, then smash the hell out of that subscribe button, tap that like button, write in a comment, do all the things that I'm sure somehow influences the algorithms on either your podcast player or YouTube to let us know you enjoy it. So without further delay, let's get into it with Michael Burns. This is Below the Line. Michael, welcome to the podcast and to the back house that I rent from you here in LA.
Happy to be here.
A place you know well. We're going to kick this off. This is the first in-person episode we've done in almost a year and a half. So we're going to kick this off with a little ritual, a little matcha ritual, just so happens to be Magic Mind.
Are we taking a shot here?
Yeah, a little. Kick it off with.
I already have my espresso, but let's do it.
We'll kick that into higher gear. And it's the new flavor, so it's
way better.
Yeah, this is version 3.5 for anyone that's interested. Just launched about 2 weeks ago. All right, Miguel. Oh, that tastes so good. Okay, so right before we started recording, you were mentioning the lunacy of the AMC meme stock. It's just climbing right now. I have not followed Wall Street Bets super closely. I definitely don't know the underlying business fundamentals of AMC. When you're saying it's crazy to you, what is so?
I'm a big fan of the theatrical exhibition business, and I like Adam Aron a lot, who runs AMC Theaters, and also like his executive staff. Elizabeth Franks is terrific, but I will tell you that a $30 billion market cap for that company is sort of mind blowing to me. But my hats off.
What should it? From my perspective, I look at it and say it's part meme stock and it's part it's obviously gonna pop back in 6 months.
It's a really strange dynamic when you have gigantic short positions, and I do not root for short sellers as a general rule. I remember somebody asked me about short selling. I was trying to explain it actually in a business school class that I was teaching with a buddy of mine, and they said, how does that make any sense that somebody can sell something they don't own? And it's a really good question. But I think one of the really tragic things that the SEC allowed a few years ago was they got rid of the uptick rule, which meant that you could not short a stock unless it was an uptick, a plus tick from the previous trade, or an even trade, which was a plus tick before that. So when they got rid of that, they enabled a bunch of hedge funds, for the most part, to be able to pile on and destroy a stock without any single uptick trade. So it took out any semblance of in my opinion, of equality and let indiscriminate short selling take place. So to a certain extent, I'm sort of enjoying, even though it doesn't make a lot of sense to me, some of these market caps like GameStop and AMC Theaters at the moment at $30 billion or $12 billion, whatever GameStop is today. Even though those market caps don't make sense to me, I'm perfectly happy to see the short sellers get their faces ripped off.
Okay, can you explain the uptick just with an example?
Sure. The uptick rule used to be that, let's say a stock was $20 a share, and let's say the trade before that was 20 and an eighth, and then it traded at 20. You couldn't short that stock until it upticked from the 20 to the 20 and an eighth or 20 and a quarter. So it gives when you get rid of that rule, it gives an unfair advantage, in my opinion, to short sellers who create panic. And that's how they make money, which is they just indiscriminately sell something, again, they don't own, all the way down. And it was ridiculous that, frankly, the SEC got rid of that uptick. It must have been pressure from the hedge funds to get rid of it.
And so that the hedge funds would, how long ago in the last few years?
Just a couple of years ago, yeah.
And so is it in their favor to get rid of it just to open up the surface area of things that they can then buy or that they can
It
make
really
bets on?
allows them to sell a position in a stock, again, that they don't own without having any buyers show up. So you can't. If you look at the other side of it, is that to drive a stock up, you need a buyer, another buyer, another buyer. In this particular case, you're in a position where the short sellers come in and they basically sell it at 20, then it goes to 19 and 7/8, then they sell it short at 19 and 7/8, all the way down. Again, these are people that don't own the stock. So the whole philosophy for them, or the trading pattern for them, is to create panic. And people don't know who is buying or selling the stock. They might think this is basically an institutional fund that is exiting their position, when in actuality it is there are trades taking place by people or institutions, or for that matter, mostly hedge funds, that are selling something that they never owned in the first place.
And so they can create panic by basically just saying, this house is on fire, no one come in it. So obviously no one's going to become a buyer, or you're much less likely to become a buyer if a massive institution is saying this is going further south.
Sure. It's that old adage, which is, when stocks have had a bad run, you're trying to figure out whether you're catching a falling knife or a falling house. You can survive a falling knife. You can't survive a falling house if it squishes you. So I am sort of happy about what's happening, even though I think it sort of defies logic at these market caps. I am happy to see companies surviving. Adam's done a great job working with retail investors who are on the other side of buying the stock right now. I guess that is the question. Why are there so many retail buyers of these stocks? Well, because they see an opportunity, which is, again, I don't want to get into the intricacies of how stock loan works, but theoretically, if you short a stock, okay, you sell something you don't own, you have to be able to have, on the other side, you need to borrow that stock from an institution that holds it in order to short it. But what happens in this particular case is that if they know there's a huge, tens of millions of shares of people that are short the stock, and as people move in to buy the stock, the retail investors, this Reddit crowd, which to a certain extent I do applaud, as a Reddit crowd moves in to buy the stock, what happens is the supply of lendable stock disappears, and then short sellers are put in a position, they're backed into a corner that they have to buy the stock back that they've sold. And that creates the classic short squeeze.
And okay, so to elucidate this further, what happens in that squeeze? So they have to buy, they sell something that they don't own. So maybe with real numbers, maybe they give an example of the actual numbers of a hedge fund selling $1 billion worth of an AMC stock that they don't own. And then what happens?
What happens when they get squeezed? When somebody says, "Hey, you borrowed this stock to short against it. We don't have the stock any longer. You need to cover your short position," which means you have to go long the stock. And then if there's not a great deal of supply out there, that's where the squeeze happens. And that's what's happening here. And so if you take a look at whether it's GameStop or AMC theaters, it is very much about the short position on the stock.
What do you mean by that? It's
the short mean how many shares are short, how many the group of investors that are short that stock betting on it to go down.
And so when it's squeezed, does that make it a pop because there's so little
because there's no supply, and then you've got an inordinate amount of demand.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so then it's not just, oh, this is going counter to what the short sellers thought. It's actually, this is going exponentially counter because it's the opposite of what they thought. They were trying to make it go south. Doesn't go south, and there's little supply being sold. That makes it almost ricochet up, and then they have to buy more of it to cover, I guess, their short position. So it's almost like they are caught into almost not a squeeze, but their feet being separated doing the splits.
It's a bloodbath. And you remember, here's the dangerous thing about shorting a stock is that you have unlimited exposure because a stock can just rise exponentially. And whereas if you buy a stock, it can only go to zero. Mm. But if you short a stock, there's no telling where it will end up, particularly if you end up in the middle of a squeeze. But again, I'm a big fan of the theatrical business. I think it's an incredibly important window for Lionsgate for us to release movies and create this awareness for the movie. And again, there's something very special about watching a movie on the big screen. I watched the other night on Netflix. I watched Inception with my oldest son, who is 14, and I saw Inception in the movie theaters. And it's still a great movie, but watching it on the big screen versus on a little screen, even whatever, I have a 50-inch television set, it was a completely different experience.
Yeah, I remember watching Inception in the theater as well. And I remember leaving in the middle of it and being like, this is one of those unique experiences. I was running to the bathroom and running back because I was like, I'm in the middle of one of these, never going to be able to recreate the first time that I see this experience. I don't know if I've ever felt that type of experience watching something on a TV. So this naturally brings us to, for Lionsgate, for the movie business, where does the theatrical distribution sit for the future of movies with, again, and you're going to have to explain these like I'm 5 years old because I don't know the business, but you see Disney putting on the actual bus advertisements in theaters and streaming June 15th or something. They're already planning that it's going to be streaming at the same time.
I think that ultimately consumers get what they want as far as content consumption. They get what they want when they want it at a price point they're willing to pay. So I think that it took a pandemic to forever change the windowing of the entertainment business. So I think you'll see, it was sort of ridiculous before if you think about it, which is, let's just talk about if you had a movie that didn't work particularly well and you spent $35 million releasing that movie on prints and advertising, commercials, trailers, etc. And now what happens is it's 2 weeks out, 2 weeks later, the movie's failed, and now you had to wait months and months and months for the movie to come out on DVD, electronic sell-through, video on demand. So you had no benefit for your advertising campaign. That made no sense. So I think the idea that the shorter windows, I know that, for example, Universal has a 17-day window, and 17-day window comes, you want to know why 17 days, that's 3 weekends. And so the idea is movies staying in the theaters as long as they're successfully working. People are going, we're attracting, getting butts in seats, and they're watching the movies on the big screen. But at a certain point when it's coming out of the theaters, it's important for the studios to be able to release that picture in a variety of different ways. We've done that. We've done that with. We did a hybrid of that with a movie recently. We've done it with Antebellum. We've done that Spiral, which is out right now, which is sort of in the Saw universe with Chris Rock and Sam Jackson. That will be after it comes out of the theaters. It will be very quickly in different windows, including, by the way, in October on Starz, which is our premium pay channel.
Who is happy about this? Sounds like the studios are happy about this, but who is happy about this shift that the pandemic has caused?
The consumers.
Consumers?
Because ultimately...
And who's unhappy about it?
Well, I mean, I guess you could make the argument that the theaters would like that movie only available in the theaters for as long a period as possible, and then after it leaves the theaters, not become available for a while. But that is not sustainable in this world. The world has moved too quickly, and I think that you've got a situation right now where there's going to be a meeting of the minds between the theatrical exhibition and the studios. But there are some things that have to take place. There has to be dynamic ticketing in the movie theaters. It's ridiculous that you've got 5 billion unsold seats in America, meaning that movies start, empty seats are there. And if you go to the movie theaters in the middle of the week and it's during the day, or let's just say it's a 4 o'clock show and there's no one there, well, to drive consumption and to get people to go to the theaters, of course you have to move the price up and down. You know, the airlines do it, hotels do it, cruise ships do it. It makes no sense that the theaters don't do it. So we have to get an alignment between the studios and the theatrical exhibition partners to make that happen, in my view. And it will happen.
And within the consumers being happy, are the studios, is Lionsgate happy about this shift?
Yeah, of course. I think we're trying to figure out a way. The margins have been, very difficult in the movie business. We take, Lionsgate takes less risk than a lot of the major studios because we have international partnerships with licensing a lot of our movies internationally. We self-distribute in a hybrid model in Latin America and also in the UK. But a lot of the other major territories, we're going to a partner there. So they're giving us a minimum guarantee in many cases. They're distributing it for a reasonable fee. So we have back end. But there is it's a very different model than the major studios have in many cases.
I've heard in previous interviews you said, and by the way, for listeners, Michael, my wife and I and our kids, we rent our house from Michael here down in LA, and I remember I was telling one of my friends that we're moving down. He's the founder of Zillow. Spencer Raskoff, who's been on the podcast before, brilliant mind. He had moved down to LA maybe 2 years before we did. I told him we're moving down, and I said, our landlord is one of the co-founders of Lionsgate. And he said, which one? And I was like, Michael Burns. He goes, all roads lead through Michael Burns. And so that gives listeners a little bit of a purview into Michael here in LA and within entertainment. So I'm really excited for this I hope we cover a lot of ground in this conversation, because if all roads lead through you, and I know a little bit about your backstory that I would love for you to tell listeners as well. One of the things that I've wondered about is within Lionsgate, within movie studio, it's such a well-known entity. It's only 20 years old or so. And you had a very different strategy with Lionsgate. And do you mind telling from what I've gathered, you kind of spotted the studio as a Canadian entity, spotted it, helped buy it or fund it into becoming what it is today.
Well, let me give you a little background on that. The true founder of Lionsgate is a guy named Frank Giustra, who is an incredibly charitable guy. Made his fortune in the mining business, and he's done incredible things for refugees lately. He's funded a lot of the Clinton Initiative. He is just a terrific human. He's based in Vancouver. He founded the company. I put founded in parentheses or in quotes, and in 1998. I went on the board of Lionsgate in August of 99. And he asked me, and I didn't really want to do it. It was a very small company, $30-40 million market cap. It was barely a public company.
And why did he ask you?
He said, because I was a media banker I was running the media practice for Prudential, and I'd had some success raising money for companies that, were effectively startups. And so I didn't really want to do it. And my buddy Dennis Miller said, you have to do this. You'll love this guy. And frankly, if he hadn't been as charitable as he was, I wouldn't have done it. But I said to Frank, hey, I'm not really the operating guy. I'm more of a strategic guy. So we have to find a great operating guy. So anyway, so I went on the board of August 99, and then I got together with one of my oldest friends, John Feldheimer, who really is truly an operating guy. He ran the television business, which is a global business for Sony. He was trying to work out his contract. He was not getting what he wanted, and ultimately he was leaving. So John and I got together with Gordy Crawford, who was probably the preeminent media investor. He ran the media practice. He was an analyst at Cap Research, American Funds. So we all talked about it, and we said, look, how do we do this? Because there hadn't been a major studio or a successful studio created in, I don't know, 100 years. And, we didn't have the legacy of a big library or, big output deals. So we put together a club deal. And we said, all right, and I went to Frank and I said, look, John has to run this. I'll be his partner. We raised a very small amount of money. I mean, small now, considering the billions and billions of dollars we've raised since then. So I remember we did a $33 million convertible preferred, but it was a pretty heady group. Gordy Crawford, Cap Research came in. My friends at Fidelity came in. My just recently fired buddy for a million years, Jamie Dimon, was not at JP Morgan. He came in. I remember visiting him on Park Avenue and giving him the outline of the business plan.
Just recently fired?
No, this is way back. Yes,
way back then.
Way
back then, he had just been fired.
He'd gotten sideways with Sandy Weil, and he had left, and he was basically in exile trying to figure out what his next thing would do, which ultimately turned into commercial credit, which ultimately segued into the Chicago Bank, and which ultimately he became probably the most powerful banker in the world. Right. And by the way, a great human with a lovely wife and 3 great girls. But anyway, so he came in and we put this club deal together. And then Harry Sloan, he was a client of mine and a great friend of John Feldheimer's as well. He had started SBS and Scandinavian Broadcasting. I took him public, and he came in, and Telemuchin, this fellow by the name of Herbert Kloiber, came in as well. So we put together a $33 million club deal, convertible preferred. And then the idea was, all right, we knew we had to drive equity returns. We had to end up with a bank facility. Coincidentally, obviously nothing to do with Jamie at the time. We ended up doing a deal for a revolving credit facility, borrowing-based facility based upon assets, but we really didn't have any assets. Frank had raised, I think, $40-50 million initially in his public. It was sort of a reverse merger back into a public company. But again, it wasn't really a public company. So we I went to see John Miller, another old friend of mine who was running the media practice for JP Morgan out here, and gave him the pitch. And he said, well, you need assets. And so Gordy and Felt and I had talked about this, which is we're going to buy every library we possibly can, because we didn't know what technology was going to emerge. I mean, there were basically DVDs and broadcast television for the library output and then theatrical. But we knew there were new technologies coming along, but we hadn't thought about streaming. We hadn't thought about electronic sell-through, video on demand. It was all, remember, this is back in 2000, so 21 years ago. So we bought every available library, some good, some bad, some ugly. But we bought the Trimark Library. Ultimately, we bought the Artisan Library. Ultimately, we bought Summit. And so we cobbled together. Well, now it's a big library. It's over 17,000 titles.
How does that compare to other studios?
I think it's probably one of the biggest as far as number of titles, and the cash flows coming out of it. You can look at the last earnings report. We talked about, I don't know, $750 million plus of very high margin revenue. So
per quarter from those 17,000.
17,000 that year end, 750 plus. Yeah. I think it was 787 or something like that. You can look at the public filings, but very high margin business. Mm-hmm. So the library has turned into being incredibly valuable, and more valuable, in my opinion, by the day right now, because what's happening is everybody else has got their own streaming services. So you have Universal that's going to hoard a lot of their product for Peacock, and then you have Warner Brothers, obviously, which is now getting taken over by Amazon. That is, I'm sorry, Warner Brothers is now been sold to Discovery. So what'll happen is now you have Discovery Plus. So what are they going to do with their product? Probably going to end up a lot of it on Discovery Plus. And then you have, on top of that, HBO Max that they have to feed from the Warner Brother library. And then you have Paramount, which is now has Paramount Plus. So we're in a position right now, and then obviously Disney is not selling stuff to the marketplace. They're using it for Disney Plus. So, and Fox is now part of Disney. So we're in a place right now where everybody is hoarding their library for their own streaming services. So being a free agent, or as I've been quoted as saying, a benevolent arms dealer in the world of library, that puts us in a pretty good spot right now for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, in tech terms, we'd say someone like Dropbox is platform agnostic. So Google Drive, obviously very specific to Google, and it's going to be implemented in, seamlessly in an Android phone, but iPhone isn't going to seamlessly integrate, Google Drive. But Dropbox is the essentially Switzerland platform agnostic example.
With a pretty good market cap, as I recall.
Great market cap, and it's that platform agnostic moniker becomes super valuable over time, but investors obviously recognize it early on. Okay, that's going to be a unique property. So
I was going to say one more thing about what it did was we basically took a very big bet on Starz a number of years ago because we didn't want to be just the sort of the lone studio without our own output. You need to be able to control your own destiny in some form. So we bought Starz a number of years ago, which is a $4.3 billion transaction, levered it up, but we believed that we could really, with the right management team, create a terrific streaming service of our own, but again, not trying to be all things to all people. And we thought we had an opportunity to take Starz internationally. And that would not necessarily be a first mover advantage, but it'd be a second mover advantage after places like Netflix. So we're now in, approaching 60 countries internationally. But the international rollout of Starz would not have had a chance to happen without having the library available to it that Lionsgate provides them. I mean, they license it for arm's length transaction. However, the idea that we control that library gives us a huge advantage. And also, Starz is not trying to be all things to all people. But last quarter we reported that Starz is now over 10 million streaming subs in the United States, and that is a terrific result for us, and it's climbing fairly dramatically. And again, they're going after underserved markets, women, believe it or not, or more than half the population are women, and it's underserved. And then we're doing a great job in the African American community with things like Power, or a bunch of the new series that we've just around the world we've just launched on the service. So I feel like that gives us a great hedge to stay this, as you said. I say benevolent arms dealer. You called it. What did you call it?
Platform agnostic.
Platform agnostic. And so we've got on our television business run by Kevin Beggs, we have 85 shows on the air and various platforms and channels around the globe. And again, we're about creating as much quality content as possible, and licensing that over and over and over again. It's like an oil well that never runs out of oil.
Yeah, and for listeners, when Michael talks about this library, it includes everything from the early hits that put them on the map as a new studio, the Tesla of movie studios, if there hasn't been another one in 100 years, to become such a major part of the ecosystem within 20 years. It's through titles like Monsters Ball, Mad Men on TV, Crash, the Oscar darling, to which I want to ask you about.
Orange is the New Black.
Orange is the New Black. Hunger Games,
Twilight, and then our newest franchise is, Now You See Me is a good one, but also John Wick.
Oh, wow. Awesome. Okay, so people have obviously seen the pre-roll of Lionsgate on movies, but it's pretty remarkable what you've done in movies and in TV. But before going into too much on that, I did want to ask you, for someone to take a movie, let's say the first John Wick, or really any movie from From literally soup to nuts, would you walk me through movie making 101? Does it start with a script? Does it start all the way to now there's 3 John Wicks? But could you, if we know that's the end of the movie, what does the beginning of the movie look like? I have no idea. Does it start with, okay, director has an idea?
Well, I think it's funny you mentioned Monsters Ball, because the movie businesses and also the television business, it's all about the people you're in business with. Not only the executives at the company, but the creators and the filmmakers, the talent, the writers, the actors. It's all about the quality people you're in business with. So it's, again, the movie and television business, it's an art and a science. And I'd also say the same thing for stars, the shows they put on the air, which is, you're looking for hits and you're looking for content that people are going to that is going to resonate with a big audience, and hopefully a loyal audience. So I think that, and again, this is simplistic because no one knows anything in the movie business, but that's an old quote from Goldman. But anyway, but the idea is, I think it all starts with, if you have a great idea or a piece of material, it could be a book, it could be a script, it could be a concept. If you have that, and it's an exciting piece of source material, that you will attract a great filmmaker, and the filmmaker will ultimately get you the talent.
And who starts with that source? I mean, these are all, it's kind of word soup for me between directors, producers,
it could be
writers.
For example, okay, I guess we did a very successful movie called Wonder. It started with a fantastic book that segued into a great script, that segued into a great movie. And now we're going to do some spin-offs of that. Mark Forster, you mentioned Monsters Ball. By the way, it's funny when I listen to your podcast and talk about how close even some of these successful companies come to going bankrupt or just not existing any longer. And we came close very early on. When we got our credit facility, we just created a ton of content, and some of it worked, some of it didn't work. But a breakout movie for us, this is 20-some years ago, was Monsters Ball, because we made it for very little money. Mark Forster did a phenomenal deal. Obviously, Halle Berry won the Best Actress Award, first African-American woman to do so. I think the only one actually to this point, but that'll change. And then Mark Forster, 20 years later, who's a good buddy of mine, just ended up doing one of the Wonder offshoots called Whitebird, that he just shot that in Europe. So it starts with that material, Hunger Games.
And who shepherds it? Like, who says?
It's creative executives.
Producer?
Okay. I mean, you take a look at that in the movie business. Joe Drake, I think Nina Jacobson brought Hunger Games to a bunch of studios, including.
Is she a producer?
She's a producer,
Okay.
very successful producer, and she brought it. Joe Drake was running the film business, then he left, and now he's back. It's like that scene from Godfather 3 where just when you think you're out, we get him back. So so Joe and Nathan were at the company way back then, and then here we go again. There's a new book that's written by the Hunger Games author. It's called Snakes and Songbirds, and that should be a big movie for us. It's almost like a prequel to originally what happens. It goes back to the sort of how President Snow became President Snow as a young man. So that is, you've got to have a team of executives that can figure out what scripts are worth making, what great filmmaker you can attach to direct that movie, because that's what's going to make the actors feel safe. I mean, we have this crazy guy directing a movie for us right now, but wildly talented, Eli Roth. We're shooting Borderlands right now. We're shooting that in
his name before, but
he's done some. You can look him up, but he's wildly talented, young, and very, very enthusiastic. But he's a really talented filmmaker. He was in as an actor too. He was in that Inglourious Bastards with that Tarantino did such a marvelous job on. But he is shooting a movie, Borderlands, based on a big video game movie, and we had a great script, but it was obviously an existing piece of IP. but we've got Cate Blanchett, who's sort of actor's crack because everybody wants to work with her. And so Jack Black is voicing this, and then we've got Kevin Hart, Jamie Lee Curtis, and it's turned into a great cast, and it'll be a really fun movie. And it's a big, expensive movie for us, but we like what's been put together. But again, it's the art and science of putting together these packages.
And walk me through the long form version of just how that starts. Does Eli Roth say, okay, hey, this video game has a big community, Borderlands. I'm gonna get a writer to help me write a script for it, and
Typically,
then pitch the script?
That's not how it works. Typically, I mean, there are filmmakers that will bring us scripts that they want to do, but typically, we'll have an executive at the company that will say, "Look, I think we should option Borderlands because we could turn it into a terrific movie." So we ended up making a deal with the holder of the video game company that owned the rights to Borderlands, and so now what happens is, now you got to figure out, all right, who's going to which writers are going to be able to create a great script out of this material. And then you go out to the marketplace through agents and managers, and you find a writer or two writers or three writers that can come in and pitch what their story would be. And then from there, you hire them to write a script, and it goes through a lot of drafts, sometimes many different writers. You ultimately get it into a place where you think there's a real movie here. There's a beginning, middle, and end. And then you get a filmmaker, and you go out to a bunch of different filmmakers, and you say, "What are you interested in this? And what would your take be on that?" Effectively, there's an audition process for them to come in and give their pitch. You hire that director, based upon that script, and then you go out together and you try to find the best actors that fill these roles, so that you can give yourself a better chance to make a great movie that'll be successful for you. I mean, that's a very simplistic.
No,
view.
that's fascinating to hear that process, because I think especially from my 10,000, 30,000 foot view, you see someone win an Oscar for screenplay, and you hear potentially that version of their story is they had the script for 5 years, they're pitching it all over the place, no one wants to buy it, and then it becomes a movie that you watch in the theaters.
I think
and it's
Monsters
amazing.
Ball kicked around various machinations of that script for 13 years.
Whoa.
Yeah. And we made it in.
So that was an example where someone had written a script and had pushed it. No one wanted to buy it. Okay, so what is the inflection point in which, for you all, that became not just a script getting kicked around for 13 years, but was bought?
I mean, I think everybody will have different views on it, but I think the difference is you get a filmmaker that has a great vision, or a filmmaker you have faith in, or in some cases, a lead actor.
How so? The lead actor says, "Hey, there's this script floating around."
It says, "I'm really interested in playing this role," and then then that, in that case, the actor could attract the director. But most cases, you get the filmmaker first. And in the television side of the business, it could be if you have a great creator, or if you have a showrunner, a potential showrunner for a scripted television show, that can come a variety of ways. We were involved with a book which was based on a woman's life, Orange is the New Black. We had already done a very successful series with Genji Cohen, Weeds, and so that was a great pairing, and ultimately led to a terrific show that we did with Netflix, that we put on Netflix. It was our show.
And what's the decision process? Is there a decision? I'm sure you love all children equally as a studio, but with different projects, just zooming out, does a majority of the revenue come from TV versus movies for Lionsgate?
I think it depends. The television business is sort of, I'll call that the long game. So you're making shows, and it's going, and you're hoping your shows go 4 or 5 years so that you can sell them in different cycles of syndication. And if you have a hit show that becomes iconic,
like Orange is the New Black.
Orange is the New Black, and also a show that we did incredibly well. And it's a funny story because my father was an advertising executive.
Mad Men is loosely based on your.
Well,
dad.
no, but I said he was he was Don Draper without the philandering, but Kevin Beggs, that was a pilot that was that show was created by Matt Weiner, and it was a pilot that was made by AMC, and no one really wanted it, period piece, and no one was in the show in the pilot that anybody knew, but Kevin Beggs, who still runs television for us and chairman of the television group with his partner Sandra Stern, he saw something very special in here, and John Feldheimer, who came out of television, liked the pilot very much, but he said it's too expensive, period piece, risky AMC, because AMC was just really, that show in many ways put AMC on the map. So anyway, so he said, I'll never get the money out of it. So I kind of did a favor for Kevin Beggs. I said, well, let me go back and pitch the AMC guys. So the buyer was there, and I said to John at the time, I said, if we get enough money out of AMC for the domestic licensing fee, and he said, you got to get at least $2 million out of them per show. Otherwise, we're just not going to.
Per episode?
Per episode.
Okay.
Otherwise, we're going to get, our head ripped off. And so anyway, we went back, and I remember I went to lunch with the executive at AMC and sort of said, this could be a great thing. Our guys really like it, but it's really expensive. It's a big risk. AMC is a big risk. Anyway, so I remember I think I got him up to, $1.9 million. And I don't think John ever thought they were going to come up to close to $2 million an episode. So I said I didn't get the $2 million. He goes, what'd you get? And I said, I think it'll give us $1.9 million for the domestic, airing 2 times. He goes, well, it's pretty close. And so anyway, that was close enough to get this thing made. And that show is the gift that keeps on giving. It won every award you could imagine. And Matt did an incredible job on that series. It is truly something that it's ageless. So sometimes you get lightning in a bottle. I think we have a couple series that could turn into. Orange is the New Black was obviously very, very successful for us, but we have a couple new series that feel like they got the chance to do just that for us on the both on the Star side and the Lionsgate television side. So we'll see.
This episode is brought to you by a little sipper called Magic Mind. Ever wake up in the morning wondering, what am I doing with my life? Well, what you probably aren't doing is sipping on them Magic Minds. Magic Mind is a 2-ounce shot, matcha, nootropics, adaptogens, functional mushrooms, everything in a morning ritual drink that you've ever wanted. You take it alongside your morning coffee or tea, you get 7 hours of creative, productive flow. It has 12 magical ingredients that all combine for everything you'd want in a shot. Energy, cognition, de-stressing, immunity support, everything in this 2-ounce beautiful shot that tastes delicioso. So go check it out, magicmind.co, enter promo code BTL. That's BTL for below the line for 20% off. Magicmind.co. Go check it out and get them sippers. With Orange is the New Black, is there a decision internally of do we make this for TV or movies, or is it just the project? It presents itself only for one or the other. Is there a strategic choice?
Well, it's funny because we have a show now on Stars, which is just kicking off, called Blind Spotting, and that was based on a movie. We did a show that was on Netflix called Dear White People. That was based originally on a movie. So
did the movie exist, or that just
the movie was already made,
okay,
and it sort of segued into a television series. The same thing, the Blind Spotting, which was done years ago as a theatrical title, became a television series. So there's more and more of that because the writing has gotten so spectacular on the television side. And when you have limited series, you have the ability to attract actors, movie actors that you could never have gotten before. But there are very few movie stars right now that can greenlight a particular movie. I mean, maybe on one hand you could name them.
Who are those people?
I don't know. I mean, look, if you look at guys that have been around forever, I mean, incredible how long, for example, Tom Cruise has been a movie star. I mean, but there are so few movie stars that have been around for decades. But I think that there's also some people, like I will almost always watch something that Tom Hanks is in. Mm-hmm. So, and he's been around, forever. I mean, you think about the beginning of his career on something like Bosom Buddies. And so, but again, he's one of the few guys that pulled off that segue back then from the television series to movies. He became a gigantic movie star, but it is few and far between. if you take a look at, as I said before, Mad Men, that cast, no one knew anyone in that cast. I had dinner with John Hamm and up the street at my favorite restaurant, and he was really, if he hadn't taken that job, if he hadn't been offered that lead to play Don Draper in Mad Men, he was probably going to move back to St. Louis and become a gym teacher. So
yeah, he had, so I think I remember hearing he had been at it for 15 years or something.
Well, look at George Clooney. I mean, who's unbelievably compelling. I think George Clooney was in like 13. I'm making this up, but 13 different television pilots, and then he kicked around and ultimately ended up on ER, and that became his big break. But in reality, that is it's a tough world. Really tough world to break into. But now you've got actors and directors, for that matter, switching back between television and feature films.
Okay, one of the other questions that I had off of just the concept of the breakdown between TVs and movies within something like Mad Men, do you there's two ways of asking this question, so hopefully I ask it the right way. But with something like Mad Men, you felt like you had lightning in a bottle right off the bat. But on AMC, almost the exact same time, you have Breaking Bad, which took a few years to really feel like this was lightning in a bottle, at least from the mainstream perspective. I remember it wasn't until season 1, Mad Men, every one of my friends was talking about it. It wasn't until maybe season 4 of Breaking Bad that I heard friends say, you got to watch this. Is one more likely than the other? Or is there a pattern that you recognize where you've seen it both ways?
Oh yeah, for sure. I've seen it both ways. But as I said before, no one knows anything. I mean, look, plenty of shows. A dear friend of mine, or a bunch of friends of mine, were on Full House. I think it was dead last when it came out on ABC. Dead last.
In the first season.
Yeah, and then you have to take a look at Cheers, same thing. Really took a long time to get an audience. And sometimes they come, out of the gate. But great shows for very specific audiences ultimately attract an audience. But the nice thing about streaming right now is, and not having necessarily the ratings pressure. So you give these shows a chance to really breathe and find their audience. So I think that's better. We have a great show that we're launching in the Modern Family slot, Home Economics, this year, which is really it's about siblings, but they're from, you talk about Tale of Two Cities. You've got one really successful hedge fund guy, and then you've got a teacher in the middle, and then you've got somebody really struggling, and these three siblings meet once a week for dinner, and just talking about the different worlds that they're in. And I think that has the potential to be a hit show. We have a great show, and I hope it gets picked up again, which is, I don't know if you've seen Zoe's Extraordinary Playlist with it's a lovely show, which is on NBC, and I hope that ends up getting picked up for another season. But again, we have shows everywhere. We have a bunch of shows on. Looks like they're going to go on HBO Max. We've got obviously a bunch on Starz. We have First Ladies with Showtime, which is all about the First Ladies of the United States. It could be a series that goes on and on and on. So again, we're looking to create these shows that can live a long time.
I want to ask if are there any attachments that you grow to these shows to where you're like, I love this show. Why the hell is it not taking off? And you objectively, just with all of your experience, know this is a great show. Or is it kind of like you see it kind of die on the vine? You're like, nope. This.
Well, sometimes it's not our decision. Sometimes it's the decision of the network or the broadcaster or somebody else's paid television. We have a little bit more flexibility if we have something on Starz. A show that we love and is slowly upticking. The nice thing about data right now in the business is that there's something called first stream. So if you have a show, and or if you put the app out there and somebody signs up for the app, which is pretty good deal, $8.99 a month.
There you go, listeners, go get it.
Go get Starz, the Starz app, because the movies and the shows are pretty extraordinary and quite a slate that Jeff Hirsch and his team have got coming forward. But the idea is, they download the app. The first thing that they watch is usually the reason that they downloaded the app. And so you get a sense for sort of how your advertising is working. and whether they stuck with the show. Did they watch one episode? Did they go to the second one? We have a show called Minx, which is a show. I think we're actually doing that with HBO, but it's a terrific show. And again, if you have great content, you want to give it the best chance you can to succeed. And so sometimes that's more difficult, but I think that the streaming services give us that opportunity.
Earlier, you were talking about when you were talking about Monsters Balls kicking around for 13 years. Is there a pattern? Am I just selecting these because it sounds good? But is there a pattern between Monsters Ball, a bunch of firsts, it's super low budget? You have all of these things that in 2003 or so, I don't know, it was maybe 2002, 2003 is you have a very sad story. You've got a interracial couple. You have a black female lead. You've got a really just depressing topic. And yet it resonates so well. And then you have something like Crash, where I think I remember in some of the research for this that you all were the only bidder of that.
Yeah, Toronto Film Festival. It's amazing to me, and that went on to win Best Picture. You
have Mad Men that you say also is just a period piece, super expensive. Is that a pattern that I'm just self-selecting because it makes for a great kind of against the odds story? Or is that something that you have seen, these things that will seem just strange at the time that maybe only you all are interested, ends up being the things that
it's funny. I give Crash, Jason Constantine, who is running our acquisitions department, and also John Feldheimer was very interested in the Crash script from the very beginning. But we were surprised after it premiered in Toronto that we were the only bidders. And I said, what are we missing here? And ultimately, we weren't missing anything, and it turned out to be terrific. But I think it's all about the people. Jason, Ida Cowan, they loved some of the initial footage on John Wick, which has turned into a massive franchise for us. By the way, Keanu.
What did others miss with something like?
Who knows? I mean, I was going to say also Keanu Reeves is just a great human, but and he's been
which is such a big part of movies these days. Is who is this human that we're supporting outside? I mean, talk about Reddit. Reddit loves Keanu Reeves.
Oh, is that right?
Loves Keanu Reeves, and it's photos of him helping someone cross the street. It's photos of him eating a sandwich by himself. That people and he looks downtrodden. That become these amazing like heroic images of he's a normal guy that goes through ups and downs.
I only do the only social media I do is basically Instagram, which is private, and I don't have 150 friends or something and family members that can see pictures of my kids. But there's a great I get the Instagram feeds, and there was a great question that he was doing Steve Colbert, and they asked him the question. He asked the question, which is, where do you think what do you think happens when you die? And he talks about. I don't want to give away the punchline, but it's just a 30-second scene. It's worth watching, and you'll get a real sense for his being with that one answer.
Right, and that feels like that's such a it's almost meme stockish, where there's something that AMC has in our heads that far exceeds anything that maybe the business fundamentals might suggest. Just AMC in our heads. Same thing with Keanu Reeves. People see these things and love him to the point where it is like, I'm not joking, Reddit loves Keanu Reeves.
Yeah, and they love AMC. We'll get them to love. We have this ticketing app that we own with Disney and Snap, but actually is now going to be run by this incredibly talented African American, Brian Bowles, and it'll be minority controlled. And the thing about that technology tied into AMC, and AMC, by the way, is an investor in it as well, is the idea that it took a long time coming, but
is that Atom Ticketing?
Atom Ticketing, yeah, you can download the app; it's free. But and they do a bunch of stuff with T-Mobile, which is very successful. They do that. They did something last week with Paramount on the Quiet Place 2, which was a very successful campaign. But the interesting thing about Adam is there where, okay, let's pre-order your concessions and then have assigned seating. All the stuff that the theatrical business has evolved into. It took too long to get there, but they're, again, doing everything they can to make it a better theatrical experience. But no, we did full circle back to the Reddit group.
Yeah, and there's something to, I would imagine 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you would not have said Keanu Reeves is one of those bankable stars.
You know, you just don't know. I mean, he's always been likable. You think about it.
Has he? I don't know.
Well, you think about it. He's had, whether it's Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, which was a franchise, Speed was a franchise, certainly The Matrix, and then you've got John Wick. So here's a guy with 4 separate franchises. Doesn't happen very often.
Yeah. I mean, even Bruce Willis as Die Hard and maybe no other franchises. Okay. So back to this pattern. Is there a pattern, or again, am I just kind of choosing these stories that you all seem to find these scripts or projects that no one else is interested in? Crash, Mad Men, Monsters Ball, and is that an acquisitions team thing? How does that happen?
I think it's your acquisition team, and we develop a lot of properties too from scratch. So original scripts. So again, we're big fans of source material, like.
What is that? Yeah, what does that mean?
Source material would be, for example, Hunger Games was a book. Now, we bought it, I think, before the book came out, or it just started, sold a few copies. Yeah. But again, a lot of studios were like, oh, we don't want to get near that. It's kids killing kids. It's way more than that. It is, I mean, if you really think about Suzanne Collins, who wrote that book, unbelievable book in so many ways. And
was she already a known entity, or how do you buy a book that's only?
Yeah, she's done a few books. Nothing had broken out like that, but she's an incredibly thoughtful person. You can look up this. I don't want to get into it right now. She could do it great justice, which is her, effectively just war theory, that there is no true reason for war in most cases of humanity. And so, but again, that was a book that was written, and you just couldn't put it down. Same thing if you think about, we didn't develop it, but Stephanie Meyers did Twilight, which is a phenomenal series of books, and also turned into a great. Summit had done that.
Bought that afterwards.
Bought Twilight, and again, that was originally optioned by Paramount.
What does that mean, option?
I mean, they had the rights. They were going to make it into a movie, and then for whatever reason, let that escape them. And we all make mistakes like that. But the Summit bought it and turned it into this. I mean, I went to the last 2. We had owned Summit when the last 2 Breaking Dawn 1 and 2 came out, so I went to those premieres. That must have been like going to a Beatles concert way back when. Not quite old enough for that.
I remember seeing some scenes of the craze that was around that movie. Could you walk listeners through a little bit more of what you touched on, or the trough of the business a few years in, when you felt like you almost went out of business?
I think we had like $38,000 left on our credit facility while we were waiting for some movies to come out. Yeah.
What year was this? Walk me through the whole.
Well, I was right around the release date of Monsters Ball, but it's not like we had, pissed away the money. We just invested in television shows and feature films, and then we're okay. Now we got to see how they do, and that one really helped us. Monsters Ball helped us from a credibility standpoint, awards consideration. These guys can release a movie, and it didn't do giant business. I think it did around $40 billion, but for a movie that cost a nickel, that was very profitable for us. So,
did you know it was going to be, like, when you watch a movie, and again, like, I'm 5 years old, when you watch a movie, do you know, okay, Monsters Ball, this is going to be a hit? Or
I don't think anybody,
that adage,
I don't think anybody knows anything. I think that there are some movies that I've seen that I was like, holy cow, that's going to work. And, sometimes you're right and sometimes you're wrong. Same thing with television shows. I've seen some great TV shows that I thought should be massive hits that didn't become that. And that's just the way that there's so many factors that are involved with whether something becomes a hit. But again, you're trying to take enough swings at the plate that you put yourself in a position to have something work. And, when you have a franchise that works like Twilight or Hunger Games for that matter, it's you can make a fortune. And you could make, theoretically, on a franchise like that, 20% of or 25% of our current market cap. So that gives
one
you
movie
for one movie series,
17,000 titles.
Yeah. So that gives you the ability to keep taking swings. And again, the idea is you want to keep making this content. You put it in your library. It's, as I said before, the oil well that never runs out of oil. And, look, we have a title. I'm actually having dinner tonight with Nathan Kahane, who's our president of our motion picture group, and Jennifer Gray. And because we're going to do another Dirty Dancing. But Dirty Dancing came out a gazillion years ago. And that movie, we always license it. We have...
you guys own that?
We do.
Wow.
And it became, we've done, many different, whether it's a touring play or the music in that. And there's just so many things that you can do with that title. And so the idea that that it will continue to, it will continue to reap dividends from a title that's that old, that's a great thing.
It's somewhat similar to angel investing or tech investing, where there's very few professions where you can essentially decide to fund something on a Tuesday, some random year, and 8 years later, 10 years later, that decision, 4 p.m. on a Tuesday, is still accretive, is still gaining value. You can't do that as a dentist, a lawyer, maybe in a class action lawsuit, but as a doctor, some surgery you did 11 years ago isn't still accruing value.
Well, and also it is one of the attractive things about that business, at least to me, which is that you're creating, you're buying, you're making content that goes on forever. So as long as there's humanity or people on the earth, if you create this content, it'll probably show up somewhere, at least be able to be seen and hopefully enjoyed in perpetuity.
I've never thought about that before. Is that for such a financial mind, and I'm sure listeners have gotten that, is that one of the primary attractions to this business early on in your financial career? Because you can't do that. Coca-Cola, yeah, you do have something valuable, but it is you got to make more Coke. Every year you got to have bottlers. You've got to have distributors. With Dirty Dancing, it just makes it into the cultural zeitgeist, and then it just continues to...
Yeah, nobody puts baby in a corner. I think that's an attractive thing about it. I was, a Wall Street guy for a long time, got burned out on too many airplanes, and it was, it was very tough. And I, ultimately wanted to start a family. So as you know, I have 3 boys, but I did like the idea of creating annuity streams, and love the idea of employing thousands and thousands of people. Not just the employees that we have at Lionsgate Stars, depending on when it is, between 1,000 and 2,000 people, but every production, all the people that we're hiring that aren't Lionsgate employees, all the 1099s that we send out every single year, changing people's lives. That is particularly gratifying to me. So, and again, I did the Wall Street thing for 20 years. John and I have been at the company for 21 years. It goes very, very fast. So, and it is exciting to build something. And I do miss the days, frankly, that I knew every single person at the company, and that's not the case anymore. And I don't like necessarily being addressed in an elevator as Mr. Burns.
Yeah, I've avoided that. I want to get into the 2 questions that I ask everybody that comes on the podcast, of stories that have helped shape your life, and then what's something you think quite a bit about but rarely get a chance to talk about. But just to round out the topic of running a studio like Lionsgate, what is nice about 2021 in this modern world that we live in for running Lionsgate and building out a studio, and what is not nice about this modern world we live in?
Well, that's a mouthful. So you want me to answer the first question, which is stories that have sort of...
let's start with that last one first, and then we'll get into
what's good right now and what's not good.
Yeah, when you wake up and you look at your 25 years in investing in media, what is great about it, and then what do you say, okay, this shit has changed?
It's still great that the power and that creating content and distributing it worldwide, it's got a lot of leg room left to run. So as you look, I think that, we're looking, for example, think about a continent that has a huge population, a great deal of minerals and resources. I think that it's just my weird thing, but I think that if we can help fix the continent of Africa, that sort of the heartbeat of the world, I think that will be great for the world. And I think if you take a look at media consumption, potential media consumption in places like Africa with billions and billions of people, look at the average age of a person in Nigeria. It's like 19. And so I think that, and they've got a great deal of resources there. So I think that there is an opportunity around the globe as these markets emerge and people are given the exposure to great content. There's no reason that, for example, the Power franchise couldn't be a giant global hit in Africa. Mm-hmm. So I think I do get excited about that. The what keeps me up at night, we're battling, giant companies at this point. My hat's off to Reed and Ted and the team at Netflix for what they've created. But, I think I saw their last amount that they're investing in content, $17-18 billion this year.
Wow.
I look at sort of what they paid for example, to get we did the original, we didn't control the rights, but we did the original Knives Out, which was a big hit for us with MRC, who brought it to us. But, even though we had, I think, the ability to do the sequel, but but again, some sort of matching rights. But look at it's in the press what Netflix reportedly paid for those two movies, which what did they pay? I think they said $450 million. That's just mind blowing to me. So, but I think that there is enormous competition. There's enormous competition right now to keep great executives and people that, when you have, in your world, these tech companies show up and they decide they want something or they want to get aggressive to get a person, there's no issue with them tripling their salary. And in many cases, they're saying, well, so what if they're under contract? We don't honor those in California. And so that becomes frustrating. Now,
do you get those emails where you just check in your email and you're like, shit?
We've done a great job. We've done a great job retaining key executives. We have a different vibe. It's a different culture. We have sort of a no asshole rule, and it is not cutthroat. We are competitive, and I think everybody at the company loves it when we win. Now, we don't have to have the most, for example, streaming subscribers, but if you take a look at the success of Starz, everybody said, well, they can only get 1 million OTT subs, and then it was 2 million, and then it was 3. They'd be capped out at 4. Well, now we're at 10, and we've said publicly how many worldwide streaming subs that we want in the next few years around the globe, which is called 50 million plus. So that's a big business for us. And so, but we're not, this $2 trillion market cap company. I think it was great for us to sort of, mark to market of what Amazon just paid for MGM. But I would argue that our library is as competitive. We don't have James Bond, but we certainly have, John Wick and Hunger Games and Twilight and Now You See Me and on. But that was a big price, which is, again, a good mark to market for us. But I think others.
What was the mark to market?
I think it was $8.4 billion.
And what was the revenue for MGM?
Oh, it's less than us. And it's a very different company, different management style, management team. But again, I think that we're going to just continue to do what we're doing. build our business, and do I think we could ultimately fit into another, strategic conversation? Sure, but ultimately that'll be left up to our shareholders.
Okay. So on the personal side, what are 3 stories that have helped shape who you have? Our last 2 questions. What are 3 stories that have helped shape who you've become as a person sitting here today?
Well, I think that in the second grade, I used to write my letters backwards and difficulty reading. I think that I haven't talked a lot about it, but I was, or I guess I am, dyslexic. So I had this great tutor, this Gene Abrams, who was my tutor in the second grade. And, I would just write, my D's would be B's and my B's would be D's. And I could, I can still read very quickly because I can read backwards and forwards. I was ambidextrous. I could write with both hands. And I think probably I was supposed to be left-handed, but at that time I was sort of forced to be right-handed, which is fine. But my second son is left-handed. But my feeling is that even though I thought that was a huge disadvantage at the time, because it was grueling, sort of learning, sort of focusing on how to read and letter shaping. My handwriting still sucks, but the idea that I thought that was such a huge disadvantage. But I can tell you that being dyslexic, actually, I think for me, turned into a giant advantage, because I don't look at problems the same way. I don't like the expression "thinks outside the box," but I do look at problems and opportunities differently. And my partner would say, John would say, "Oh my God, please don't give me another idea today," and because part of his task as being the CEO is he has to figure out which ones are the good ones. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure I have a bunch of crappy ones, but every once in a while I have a few good ones too. And I think it's actually an idea that you might not have heard before, whatever the subject. So I think that that story shaped who I am. I also think that, again, I also say over and over again, there by the grace of God, because, so many people, no one escapes tragedy. Nobody. And these perfect Instagram, worlds, they don't exist. And they can, on the surface, they can look like it's a perfect world, but trust me when I tell you that everybody has issues, big issues at sometimes, small issues at other times. But I think that, I said that to somebody recently, I said, look, it's not like we were born in a, Syrian refugee camp, okay, and have to fight our way out of that. So the idea that we were blessed to be born, where we were born and into the family that we had, or even if it was just a mom, the idea that you can be in a position where you can sort of, you've got some huge advantages. One of my big advantages were my father and mother raised us, which was in Connecticut. My next door neighbor turned into my mentor, Wick Simmons, who I met when I was probably 10 years old. And he's the guy that encouraged me. I said, what do you think I should do when I get? No, first he encouraged me. He said, where do you want to go to college? I was going to go to a small college in Maine. And then a buddy of mine was going to play baseball. So I went on a spring break trip with him and to Arizona. I had no interest in going to ASU. And then ultimately it turned out to be one of the greatest decisions I ever made, even though he didn't make the baseball team. He said, I can't believe how great these players were. But my neighbor and my mentor said to me, I'm a big fan of you anybody getting repotted. So I left the East Coast, ended up at Arizona. Then I ultimately, when I got out of school, I wanted to be a salesperson. So I said, what are the great sales programs? And we talked about it. And he said, well, the greatest sales program in the world is IBM. And so I ended up interviewing and getting a job at IBM as a salesperson. And I did well in your hometown. I ended up doing well on my training program in Dallas. So I was ranked high enough so I got to pick my territory, which was Newport Beach. So I ended up in California, where ultimately I started my career and ended up in business school out here at the Anderson School at UCLA. So that really changed my life, which is, again, just the sort of the one influencing person that helped me. We all have those people. So I think
what a great inflection point of hearing that advice of, I'm a big fan of people getting repotted.
Yeah, it was good advice. It was really good advice. I'm really glad I did it. And here I am. I mean, I went back to New York for a long time with my Wall Street career, but I ultimately came back here the weather's much better here.
Much better. Yeah. And moving here, even from San Francisco, it's, I feel like it's cheating every day. So with it, and just to round that out of curiosity, what was that traversal from Wall Street to now running one of the biggest studios in the world?
I think it was travel and the desire to start a family. And again, I looked at my, I did this thing recently where I was looking at how many miles I've flown. I can't tell you how many, millions and millions and millions of miles. Although I was really excited. I saw this thing the other day where these new, I think United Airlines is going to launch in, I think, 5 or 6 years. They've got this plan to have these supersonic jets.
Oh yeah.
So the idea of going to New York in 2 hours, that's much more appealing to me than the current 5 or 6. So I think that was really a tipping factor for me.
Continue that thought. How to, beyond want to start a family, travel less. What else pulled you towards entertainment and then joining up with the original founder of Lionsgate?
Again, I think it was the most appealing thing was for me, which is there is no other business that I can think of. You can create as a tech company an operating system that could go on and on and on. How long is Windows going to be around? Maybe forever. But the idea that you could make something that would live on in perpetuity and could, influence, not necessarily influence, but enrich people's lives, that's appealing to me. And we've done that. And I think that a lot of stuff would not have happened without this being in a place that could create this enormous amount of content.
I've never thought about, like I said, I never thought about that investment aspect, that asset aspect of the movie making business. That it just, we're sitting here talking about Dirty Dancing.
I don't think a lot of people look at it. Remember also the way the accounting works in this business, which is crazy to me, which is you effectively have to write off, well, for sure in 10 years, whatever amount of money you put into content, you write it down to zero. Most of it, 80, 90% in 7 years, but all of it in 10 years. So the basis, the book value of something like Dirty Dancing or Hunger Games for that matter, the first Hunger Games, is now zero. Well, that's ridiculous.
Yeah. Why? That seems
just the way it works. It's the same idea.
So like James Bond would be written down to
those first
zero 50 years ago.
All those movies, not all of them, but some of the recent ones, they've still got some, quote, useful life, but all of them, The Spy Who Loved Me, where I fell madly in love with Barbara Bach a million years ago. Yeah. You don't even know who Barbara Bach is, do you?
I don't.
She's married to Ringo Starr.
Okay.
He's a Beatle.
There we go. All right. One of half. He's half of the remaining Beatles.
I'll tell you a funny story about that. So I lived on the Upper West Side, so I'd met through mutual friends and just walking around Central Park. I'd met John Lennon a couple of times, and then I went to some.
Wait, how?
Just somebody was there, and I said, "This is John
mutual
Lennon."
Friends?
Couldn't have been nicer. He lived in Dakota, which was 72nd, I think, Central Park West. But anyway, so I'd met him, and then I went to this mine, the mines that blow up. I went to this fundraiser, and I met Paul McCartney at that. He was, I think, married at the time to this woman named Heather, and so he was there. So I said hello to him, and then a buddy of mine who sadly died recently, my friend Alan Kozlowski, was doing this video with George Harrison. So I met George Harrison. So I'd met 3 of the Beatles, and I thought, well, that's great. I've met 3 of the 4 Beatles. And then I went to an engagement party for a friend of mine, Portia, and who was getting, at the time, she didn't ultimately marry her, but she was going to get married to Barbara Bach's daughter. Well, I guess it was the stepdaughter of Ringo Starr. So I walked in, and my friend Portia said, "Oh, I want you to meet Barbara. Say hello to Ringo." And I looked at Ringo and I said, "Now I've met all the Beatles." And he looked at me and said, "So have I." It's pretty great.
That is awesome. I can't wait for my first Beatles story. That's phenomenal, and the people that you run, the circles you run in, it's quite unique. So is that story number 2? Is that one of the stories?
We don't have to stick to your rule. Your rule is 3 stories. Yeah. I think 2 are good.
No, okay, we can do 2, and we'll add the Ringo Starr story as number 3. it sounds like it shaped your life from then on. Last question for you, Michael, is what's something you think a lot about, but you rarely get a chance to talk about professionally, just even personally? Anything that takes up a lot of mind share that you don't get to talk about?
I think that there was a book I read. My sister sent it to me. She's very Catholic. I think I'm more spiritual than Catholic, but and I listened to your podcast. I mean, so many people say they're raised Catholic, but I don't think it necessarily that even if you don't identify as Catholic, I think that probably some aspect of Catholicism never leaves you. But I'll tell you what so she sent me this book. I wish I could remember the name of the title, but it was about these, I'll send it to you later, but it was it was basically a bunch of passages from these hospice nurses that were basically on the deathbed of thousands and thousands of people. And so they all talked about, the last words people said, what was important to them, what they were, talking about, knowing that they were dying. And what I think about all the time, which is, and if I sort of crystallized, and again, I don't want to belittle these incredibly beautiful passages that these hospice nurses wrote, but ultimately what matters, and it's, the older I get, the less I know, but I do know this, and they said this so well, which is, it's all about who loved you and who you loved. And the rest of it is just noise. So that's what I think about. Thanks for having me.
Well, on that note, I'll let you get back to your three wonderful boys and get out of here. But Miguel, thank you so much for coming over, sharing the insights and the time with listeners. This is a great, for me, on-ramp to this new world that I find myself in living in LA, but even, and 10,000 times more so, very thankful to have the personal on-ramp of living right behind you and you being so gracious to our family as we moved here.
Well, your family is spectacular.
Well, thank you for thinking so.
Thank you.